Hi, my name is Aya. You're watching Aya Reads, and December has started, which means the end of the year videos have started. I looked at my schedule for December, and I'm probably going to be uploading 3 times a week in December as opposed to 2 times a week, so you have that to look forward to. Of course, I have to start off with my November wrap-up. So I read a lot in November, so I am definitely out of my reading slump. Most of the books I read in November were for the Goodreads Choice Award, so I recently uploaded that video. It's a very long one, so I go in depth about almost every single book I read in November. So if you want more of my in-depth thoughts, check out the vlogs I did. I will mention with every book in which vlog I talked about it. So let's, as always, start off with my stats. I finished 11 books this month and I had 1 DNF, which equates to 4,532 pages. I had 1 DNF, like I said, 2 stars, 1 2.5 stars, 2 3 stars, 4 4 stars, 1 4.5 stars, and 1 5 stars, which means my average rating for the month is a 3.5 stars. It's not my highest average rating, but it does make sense considering for the Goodreads Choice Award, since I read the top 20, not all of those are books that I would necessarily pick up on my own. I had 11 adult novels and no young adult novels. I read 1 magical realism book, which I do have to say that magical realism book, technically it was nominated for the romance category, but to me that was not a romance, definitely a magical realism. And I read 10 romances, 6 contemporary romances, 2 fantasy romances, 1 sports romance, and 1 dark romance. I read 11 novels and no novellas. So let's start with the reviews. The one and only DNF I had this month was Lies and Weddings by Kuang. I tried to read this one for the Goodreads Choice Awards, and this was just not for me, Park. It just wasn't. This, to me, screamed that it was not a romance. This follows rich people, as he's been known to do. Obviously, one of his famous books was Crazy Rich Asians. It says here, thrilling plotted story of love, money, murder, sex. I still don't technically know what this is about. Up to the point where I was at, we were at this wedding of this like rich lady, and we got point of views of all her family. So her mom, her brother, their friends. And like I said, everything to me screamed that it was more a mystery than a romance, which that's fine. I like mysteries, but I don't know, like I don't care to read about rich people and their rich problems. I just don't. That is just not interesting to me at all. Also, I was on a time restraint, so I tried to read this one through audiobook, and I do have to say the audiobook narrator, it wasn't necessarily her voice that bothered me, it was the voices she put on for the characters that bothered me so much. They were so annoying that I just stopped. I just couldn't. So I cut my losses and I DNF'd this one. I had 2 2-star reads. The first one is The Courting of Bristol Keats by Mary E. Pearson. I did an entire reading vlog specifically for this book, which I'll leave linked for you. This one I was looking forward to so much because The Remnant Chronicles by her is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. It's still one of my favorite trilogies. So I had high hopes for this one because this was going to be her first adult fantasy romance. And unfortunately, it was a 2-star for me. You follow Bristol Keats, whose parents died, her father recently. And she's been living in this human world. She thinks she's human. She thinks her family's human. Like, she just thinks she's a normal girl. And she's only living with her and her 2 sisters. So she thinks everything is fine until she gets this letter from a mysterious aunt telling her to meet her. And when she goes to this meeting, she finds out that her parents are not human. They are from this Fae realm. And then she finds out that her father might not be dead. So she makes a deal with the king in this world, or a king in one of the Fae territories, that she will help him as long as he will help her find her dad. And he wants to find her dad to kill him. It's basically their romance. I did not like this book at all. I had major issues with some of the writing choices made. It's not necessarily her writing style, because I feel like she has this beautiful flowery writing style. It's the choices that were made. To me, this felt like she wrote, so this is going to be a duology. So to me, it felt like she wrote the entire story, and either she or the editor decided to cut literally halfway through and split the book. Because the way this book ended, it didn't feel like a satisfying arc of a story. Like maybe once you read the second book it will be, but as far as like in series you always have, like every book still has to have a solid middle, beginning and end, and this book I felt like had a solid beginning and like part of a middle. The ending made no sense because it didn't feel like an ending. I didn't really believe in the romance. I also didn't believe in the friendships. I felt like there were too many side characters that I didn't care about, when I feel like in the Remnant Chronicles, the side characters were one of the shining stars in that book. So to me, it felt like I was reading a completely different author. I didn't enjoy this book. I would not recommend it. If you want more of my in-depth thoughts, check out the vlog I did for this book. The other 2-star book I had was the Rom-Commers by Katherine. I read this one for the Goodreads Choice Awards. In this book you follow Emma and Charlie. Charlie is this famous Hollywood screenwriter, and Emma has been a big fan of his. And she wanted to be a she still wants to be a screenwriter, but because she has to take care of her sick dad, she had to let that dream go. And then one day her ex-boyfriend, who's also her manager, tells her that he has a job for her because Charlie has been writing a rom-com, but it's awful, so he wants her to co-write the screenplay with him. She at first doesn't want to because she doesn't want to leave her brother in the care of her sister, but her father, or did I say brother? Her father and her sister convince her that she should go, so she does. She has to stay at Charlie's place to finish the screenplay. Charlie doesn't want her there at first, and she overhears conversations where he wants to kind of sabotage this screenplay because he had to do this screenplay in return for another screenplay he really wanted to do. So he has no interest in actually writing a rom-com. But she loves rom-coms and she really wants to do that. So they kind of make this deal that they will work together, and it's their romance. Once again, did not believe in this romance. I thought Charlie was a giant douchebag, and she kept forgiving him. And you guys know I love a pining heroine, but I felt like this was not pining, this was pathetic. Like the way he said things to her, and she still wanted to do stuff for him. I was like, at one point, girl, pick your dignity off the floor and leave. I didn't find him likable at all, and I didn't think he redeemed himself by the end. And I had no issues with her in this book up until a certain point where she was so bitchy to her sister, and I was like, I'm sorry. That kind of is unforgivable because she said things to her sister, and then once her sister said similar things, she got so irrationally angry where I was like, bitch, you just said the same exact thing. Why is it allowed for you to speak to your sister that way, but it's not allowed the other way around? So I just didn't like it, and this was just not for me. The book that I gave 2.5 stars did make me very sad, and it was Daydream by Hannah Grace. Once again, I read it for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Normally I would have already read this book because I read the first and second book, but I was in a reading slump when this book came out. You follow Henry, of course, and Hallie. And Henry you've seen around in the first 2 books, and Hallie is a new character introduced. She recently got broken up with by her boyfriend, who used to be her best friend. Their relationship was not working. And then she meets Henry and they become friends, and he is struggling with one particular class, and she realizes why that is because he's neurodivergent in some way. It's not necessarily said what kind of neurodivergence he has. So she decides to help him because her sister has ADHD, so she has found ways to help her sister, so she thinks Henry might benefit from that as well. And in exchange, he will help her become more interesting because she wants to be an author and she wants to enter in this writing competition, but she feels like she doesn't have any experience to pull from, so he will give her those experiences, and of course it's gonna be their romance. I had some major issues with this book. First of all, I felt like these characters had no chemistry. I felt like there was no stakes in this book, and it was just not an interesting romance, and I felt like she used these gimmicks that I just mentioned, but they didn't feel authentic, and I didn't feel like they worked. Because on paper, I should like it. Like, it's like fake dating, it's tutoring, but it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel that authentic while reading it. Like, I felt like it was used, but then the follow-through was not that great. I felt like I've read it done better. And I had major issues with not the representation of Henry, because of course she based it on her own experience. I feel like that is authentic. Obviously, I don't want to speak on that because it's own voices, and I'm not going to speak on that. I found it so unrealistic that Henry, who at least one of his mothers is a doctor, didn't find ways to help him at all. Yet it took Hallie meeting him twice to immediately spot what is going on and immediately find things that worked for him. That to me made no sense. Like, I felt like Hannah should have either have given Henry different parents, parents that might not be a little bit more clueless, or it would have made sense that they were more clueless, or they should have given another reason why they may not have spotted that he may be neurodivergent. Like, for example, had he had a lot of siblings, or maybe, I don't know, but the way his parents were described and the way that he was an only child and the way his symptoms presented, I feel like it made no sense whatsoever that he didn't find other things that worked for him, because I would assume his mothers would have figured it out by now, and it wouldn't take Hallie, a random girl, to figure it out and help him. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just the studying part, it was also him really having issues with a lot of noise. Like, you would assume those things would have been worse as a child, and you would think that his moms would have already found ways for him to deal with that. So that was my biggest gripe with this book. But other than that, it was too long. This series has way too many side characters that I keep mixing up. And yeah, I didn't like this book. I'm sorry. Moving on to the 3 stars. The first 3 star I had was Swift and Saddled by Lyla Sage. This is the second book in her Rebel Blue Branch novel. This is actually the first book I read in this series. You follow Ada and Weston, and Ada and Weston meet, and they have this hot encounter where they have this hot kiss. And then they meet each other again, because it turns out that she is the interior decorator or interior designer. She's going to be the interior designer for this new project he does, and they didn't know who each other were when they met. So now they agree that they will not have anything romantic because he's technically her boss. But of course, they cannot stay away from each other, and they do end up together. I like this book, I just didn't love it. I felt like I sometimes have issues with books where characters meet each other on page for the first time, and then, especially if a book is this short, we have to, like, sometimes it works, obviously, but sometimes it just doesn't for me, where it would have worked for me had it been like a hate to love, or if they had known each other in the past. So I definitely think book 3 will work for me, because that is both a hate to love, and these characters have known each other for a very long time. And I do think the first book in the series will work for me because these characters have known each other for a while. I just felt like I knew Weston because we met all his family members, and it was clear, like, his character was clear, yet we didn't really know Ada, in my opinion. I didn't know anything about her. Like, I felt like this book is very short. It's barely 300 pages. I feel like this book could have been 50 pages longer, and all those 50 pages should have been spent on Ada and her background and her family dynamics. I flew through it. It wasn't a hardship to read, but I haven't thought about these characters after I put the book down. The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. This is the book that I classified as a magical realism, because to me, this is not a romance. Like, this is clearly like a women's fiction, because you only really follow Delphi's story. Like, at one point, okay, so basically you follow Delphi, who in the first chapter, she chokes on a burger and dies. She goes to the afterlife, and there she meets this afterlife therapist who tells her that if she finds her soulmate, whose name is Jonah T, who lives in London, if she can find him in 10 days and gets him to kiss her, then she can go back to her life. And if she doesn't manage to do that, then she'll die again and stay dead this time. So she uses these 10 days to go all over London to find this Jonah character. And in the meantime, she realizes what's really important in life, which is friendships, which is finding a life and not being stuck in the past, and also falling in love with her neighbor. And the problem I had with this book is, so the actual romance only starts off in the last 150 pages, and technically her and the neighbor had interactions, and actually interactions that I would have immediately picked up on in other romances, which is they were literally fake dating for his parents. But to me, I was like, they're not gonna end up together. She's finding her soulmate. Like, it was not clear to me that she was gonna end up with the neighbor. Like I said, we solely focused on her and not enough on him. Like, I didn't really know him, and she had to build up this romance in the last 150 pages, so it was basically a novella. I did like this book. Like, it was entertaining. I was rooting for Delphi. But as far as a romance is concerned, I couldn't give this any higher than a 3-star. But I would recommend it because I did enjoy her finally getting out of her shell and meeting people, because she really didn't have a life before she died, because she basically just worked, and then she would watch TV shows alone, and anytime somebody wanted to hang out with her, she would brutally turn them down. And that is another problem I had with this book. I know she was on a deadline, and I know she had to change something, and I know the stakes were very high because she would literally die if she didn't change. But still, changing this much in 10 days was a little bit unrealistic for me. So that is also like, I couldn't really, I'd already jumped the gun for the fact that she died and then came back. It was a little bit harder for me to believe that she could change this much in 10 days. But like I said, I still did enjoy this book. It was entertaining. Now for the 4-star reads. All of them except one I read for the Goodreads Choice Awards. My least favorite 4-star read was The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. So this is the second book in the Dream Harbor series by her. And you follow Hazel and Noah. And Hazel pretty much doesn't really have a life. Like, she likes to read her books, and she is turning 30 in 2 months, and she wants to basically cram in her 20s in those last 2 months. So she wants to experience, like, have all these experiences that other people have in their 20s. So she's a bookseller, and she finds these clues in her books. Like, somebody has been marking up the new books. Basically, she thinks there are clues to places that she should go to. And Noah has been buying a book from her bookstore every week, and her friends think that he has a crush on her, but she doesn't think so because she doesn't think that she's hot, and he most certainly is. Like, he constantly sleeps around with the tourists, and she also thinks that he has no interest in her. But she does ask him if he wants to go with her on these adventures, and he agrees because he has been pining for her. He has had a crush on her. So it's their romance while they are doing these dates, basically. And I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I had a good time, but I don't think this couple will stick with me in the long run. I did really like this small town. It definitely reminded me of Gilmore Girls. I like the town meetings, and I am definitely looking forward to reading the rest of these books. Yeah, I liked the fact that she's a bookseller, and I really love the fact that he wasn't a reader before, but he started reading these books, or he started buying these books and reading them just so he could get close to her, and now he really loves reading, and I love that. If there's one thing I love, it's that. So yeah, I thought he was adorable, and I really liked her too. And I'm very much looking forward to reading the first book. And I don't know when this book comes out, but the romance between Mac and Maggie, I think. Maggie, right? I don't know. But I read this book in a day. I flew through it, and I would recommend it. The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. This book, you follow Anna and Liam, and they used to be married. So they already had their marriage of convenience, because in college, in order to get this cheap housing, they had to be married, because the company would only rent to actual couples and not students. So they got married, but then they hadn't spoken in 3 years. And now he's on her doorstep telling her that they never divorced, because this is a very rich guy who will only get his inheritance, or he's from a very rich family, and he'll only get his inheritance if he has been married for 5 years. And he did tell his family that he has been married, and now on his sister's wedding, her mom insists on him bringing her. So he asks her to come with him to the wedding, and then in exchange he will pay her $100,000. But she is everything his family is not. So his family is what you assume like really rich people to be like, and she is a free spirit, and she is foul-mouthed. Oh yeah. Anna's feisty, foul-mouthed, messy, and the complete opposite of what the Weston family had anticipated for their son. So his sister gets married on this tropical, secluded island, and they have to pretend that they have been married and in love for 5 years, when really she doesn't even technically know his first name. She thought his name was West all this time, but it's Liam. And while they're on this island, they fall in love. I really like this book. If you really love The Unhoneymooners, I think you're really gonna like this one. I like that this was a little bit open door, because the latest Christina Laurens haven't been. And I do think they can write sex scenes well, as you can see in this book. I like the twist on this marriage of convenience. I like that they were already married for 5 years. That had nothing to do with an inheritance, technically. But like the third act breakup, I was like, okay, so then you don't get all this money. Like, I didn't really care about that. Because I didn't care about that, it made me realize that I wasn't that invested in the romance, but I did enjoy it. I would recommend it. The only book that I didn't talk about in a vlog is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. The plan was to read this so that when the, what's that book called? The Songbird and the Heart of Stone came out, I could read it immediately, but I didn't end up having the time because of all the Goodreads choice books I still had to read, so I still haven't read that book yet. But this is the second book in the Nyaxia series, and this is the finale to the first duology following Oriah and Rain. And so I cannot really tell you a whole lot about this book because it's a direct continuation of events of the first book. But the first book is The Serpent and Wings of Night, and you follow this human girl whose father is the vampire king. And she lives in this vampire world, and like she's not as powerful. So every 200 years, their goddess Nyaxia has this competition, and it's a Hunger Games competition, basically. So there's only one person who will be alive in the end. Whoever wins the competition gets to ask a favor of the goddess Nyaxia. And Oriah enters, even though she's the only human, the rest are all vampires. And during the competition, she meets Rain and she falls in love with Rain. And it's basically their continuation of their story. The first book ended on a giant cliffhanger. So I still cannot believe it took me this long to read the sequel, but I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. The first book, I do have to say, I wasn't the biggest fan of Rain. Like, he was fine. I just wasn't in love with him. The second book, I thought he was way sexier. Like, I was very intrigued by him in the second book. So as far as the romance department is concerned, I was very intrigued by their romance in the second book, which is what I thought when I finished The Ashes and the Serpent and the Wings of Night. Actually, The Serpent and the Wings of Night, I read for a vlog earlier in the year. So if you want to know more of my in-depth thoughts on the first book, check that video out. Then my favorite 4-star was, let me actually grab a drink because I've been talking nonstop. 1 second. All right, I'm back. So my favorite 4-star I read this month was The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. So this book, actually, you follow 2 bisexual characters, and one of them, Theo, is also non-binary. So I really liked that representation. Theo and Kit, they used to be together, but they broke up 4 years ago while they were on the way to the European food and wine tour they were supposed to go on. But they broke up on the plane on the way there. And they haven't spoken to each other in 4 years. Theo stayed in California and Kit moved to Paris to start pastry school. They didn't get a refund, but they did get like a voucher that they could redeem for the same food and wine tour later. And the voucher almost expires. So when Theo gets there, sees that Kit also decided to go on this same food and wine tour at the exact same time. So now they have to interact. They decide to make it less awkward, to have this competition to see who can sleep with the most people in the most cities, I guess. So they have this competition, and their food and wine tour goes through France, Spain, and Italy. Yeah, of course, while they interact, they have to reminisce about the past and old feelings come back. This is told in an interesting way. The first half of the book is told completely from Theo's point of view, and the second half of the book is told completely from Kit's point of view. I liked it in the end. At first, I was debating whether or not I would like it. I do have to say, the whole body count thing was not really my favorite thing because I tend to not really love it when in book. Like, I get it in some books, people will have sex with other people. I just don't like it to go on too long, and I did feel like this went on a little bit too long. But what I did love was, I tend to love a second chance romance, and also I really loved seeing them go through all these different cities, and especially loved all the food descriptions and all the wine descriptions and the descriptions of all these places. What I didn't like, however, was the stereotypes of all these Europeans. I'm European, and yes, I may not live in either France or Spain or Italy. I have been to those countries multiple times, and the way they described them, I was like, okay, this hasn't been my experience too much. And what I also found interesting was that every single person these two came in contact with wanted to fuck them. And I'm sorry, also, that hasn't been my experience, that Europeans want to fuck every American they see. So that was also kind of like, I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit for that. But other than that, I thought this was an enjoyable read. I really liked reading this while listening to the audiobook. And like I said, I did love all the food descriptions in this book. Like, it made me so very hungry, especially while they were in Paris and they described all the pastry shops they went to. I was like, I need to go to Paris right now and eat all those pastries. So I did enjoy that. Then my 4.5 star read was Play Along by Liz Tomforde. Once again, I would have already read this book if it wasn't for my reading slump. So this is the 4th book in the Windy City series, which is one of my favorite series. And you follow Kennedy and Isaiah. And in the 3rd book, you found out that Isaiah, who is Kai's brother from the 3rd book, got accidentally married in Vegas to his longtime crush, Kennedy, who is the athletic trainer for their baseball team. I don't know if you can hear that. That is a very loud motorcycle. And in this book, you see them get married. Well, you see them meet for the first time, then you see that faded Vegas wedding. And now their manager tells them that he has to fire one of them. And of course, it's going to be Kennedy and not Isaiah. And Kennedy already has kind of a tough time because she is a doctor, but her boss is a sexist pig. So he already hired her as a doctor, and he thought he hired a man. And when they first met, he rescinds the offer and tells her the position is not available anymore. But if she wants to stay, then she can be an athletic trainer, which is a position that she's overqualified for. Isaiah is the only one who knows that. So since she doesn't want to get fired, Isaiah tells the manager that they have been in love, and there was already a precedent set that a married couple could work together. You're just not supposed to actually start a romance. I don't know. It was explained better in the book, I do have to say. So now they have to say married, but Kennedy wants to apply for an actual doctor position for another team in California. So they have to get married until then, and then they can get a divorce and she can go on and finally do the job that she was trained for. He, like I said, has always had a crush on her. So he's going to do everything in his power to make her fall in love with him in the 6 months that they have. And I really enjoyed this book. I do have to say, I ended up giving this 4.5 stars and not 5 star because I did feel like Isaiah was too perfect at times. I was like, okay, there has to be some sort of flaw with him. Even though, yes, technically he had his own issues, obviously. His mom died while she was driving during a storm. And now anytime there's a storm, he gets very anxious and he has to make sure that all his loved ones are safe and at home, and specifically not driving. So it's their romance. And Kennedy, I don't know, I felt like there were not high enough stakes, even though there could have been high stakes, considering she comes from this rich family that is kind of supporting her. So it would make sense, like in other books similar to this one, like the rich family would form more of an obstacle, and that wasn't really the case, which is fine. Like sometimes I like a little bit less of an angstier book, but like I said, I am talking about it like I didn't like it. I still obviously loved it. I love her writing style, and it was a good romance. 4.5 stars. I loved the scenes we got with Kai and Miller and little Maxie and Monty. So those things were amazing. So I did really like that we got to expand on that, considering Caught Up was one of my favorite books last year. And last but most certainly not least, my only 5 star was Leather and Lark by Brynne Weaver. I do have to say, it says enough that this is my one and only 5 stars because I did really love it, but I don't think this is going to make it in my favorites list for this year. I just think this was kind of what I was craving while I was reading all the other Goodreads nominees. Like, this felt to me like more of a grittier, darker indie book as opposed to like a sweet, cutesy, traditionally published contemporary romance. I guess not that all of the other books are sweet and cutesy, but I don't know. Like, I'm sure I don't have to explain it to you that there's a distinct difference between like an indie published book and a traditionally published book. But you follow Lachlan and Lark, and Lachlan is Rowan's brother from the first book, and the first book is Butcher and Blackbird, and Lark is Sloane's best friend from the first book, and this is their romance. They met each other a year ago and things went horribly wrong between them, and because of that, Lachlan, who's a contract killer, the company I guess he works for lost a big client in Lark's family. Now people from Lark's family are being murdered one by one, and her family thinks it's Lachlan doing that. She doesn't want Rowan or Sloane to get hurt, and she would know obviously if his brother died, that would hurt them. So her aunt tells her that in order to protect Lachlan, she has to get married to him and convince her family that she's in love with him, so they will leave him alone. So she does that reluctantly. Now they're married and living together, and it's their romance. So I know a lot of some people who really love Butcher and Blackbird didn't really love this one. I have to say, for me, it was the other way around. Butcher and Blackbird was not my favorite. I really loved this one because I felt like it was darker. It focused more on the dark side as opposed to the rom-com side. And I tend to love A Marriage of Convenience. I loved the smutty sex these two had. Like, it was so hot. And I just really liked it. And I listened to this while reading it, and I loved the audiobook, especially the male audiobook narrator was so sexy. And I loved that the female narrator, since Lark is a singer, sang some parts. I love that too. So yeah, this to me was thoroughly entertaining. And like I said, I just loved, like, for me, Butcher and Blackbird, I felt like I wanted to know more about why these two were the way they were, because they had some dark past, and I really enjoyed in this book that we got to really delve into that. I do have to say, read the trigger warnings, because especially there is a very sad scene where a dog gets very severely injured. So check your triggers before reading it, but I did love it. So those were all the books I read in the month of November. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. Also, I'd really love to know what was your favorite book that you read in November. While you're down there, leave me some sort of musical instrument emoji. I hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know by leaving a like if you did. And thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.